The Cannabis Heals Me podcast, episode 126.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. This is your host, Rachel Kennerly, and we are recording, as always, at the Storybook Inn Studios. We are back for the first time in a long time for a Thursday educational episode. I have had a couple of guests lately, and we mentioned the film Unprescribed. Both Fabian Henry and then also Christian Ryan from earlier this week. We had talked about the film Unprescribed. And so I thought that I should probably get Steve Ellmore on to talk a little bit more about the film. Steve is the writer, director, producer, key gaffer, coffee boy, whatever you want to call him, for the film Unprescribed. Is kind of his baby, and it's an amazing documentary that I watched a few weeks ago. Highly recommended to anyone to go out and listen to, and I'm very pleased to welcome him to the program. Steve, thanks for joining us on the Cannabis Heals Me podcast.
Thank you, Rachel. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, and I'm thrilled that you're here with me. Are you what was your official title with the movie?
Besides Jack of all trades, it was almost a one-man show, save for the help of some volunteers. But officially, I'm credited as producer, director, and those are the two I go by. I'm also the primary editor and film. I'm the cameraman. So, and then recently with the critic reviews, I've been credited as writer, which I guess makes sense because I pretty much had to do the storyline and everything as well.
Yeah, well, that's great. I watched the movie. I got an invite to the screening, I think, that Ilera was doing. And I live in Texas, so I'm like, I would love to come, but that would be a tough commute for me to Pennsylvania from here.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's how the movie got on my radar, and really just kind of dropped the ball because they invited me several months ago, and just kind of, life and Corona and life, just things gotten crazy. So followed up with you and ended up watching the documentary, and I really loved it. I loved the men and women that you had on there speaking about these issues, and it was just a really, really well done. So, you deserve a pat on the back for what a great job you did on the film. I was very, very pleased with it. I was wondering, how do you get involved in something like this? What made you think, I want to do a movie about cannabis? Because that's not always at the top of everybody's priority list.
That's actually the golden question. So for the most part, like I said, this was a one-man film because this was actually had some personal ties. I have very deep anxiety, and I've had some lifetime traumas. But I'm a career military person. I've worked I did 20 years in the United States Air Force. I retired. I went to work at Fort Meade for the Public Affairs Office on the installation there. Eventually went to the Pentagon, and so on and so forth. And today I'm still working with veterans. And the idea came to me, it was brought to my attention about medical cannabis from another Air Force veteran who, just a short story, as soon as I got out of the Air Force, they were talking about sequestration and taking away Air Force benefits, well, retiree benefits in general. And that pissed me off, and I thought I'd go ahead and use what tools I had available, and that was my skills as a photographer and my love for editing. And I decided I was going to make a documentary called Allegiance to the Same, which was based on the oath that Congress takes to serve our country as well as our service members, just like we take a similar oath. Anyway, long story short, thanks to the VSOs, MSOs, they cleared that up and didn't have any more fight to fight, so I shelved it. But there were some trailers that I had on YouTube. And a gentleman who got out of the Air Force had a friend of his who were going to start a grow in the Midwest, brought the idea to me about documenting their experience because it was a very conservative state. They didn't know if they would fail or succeed. And my first thought was, hey, yeah, I'd love to help my fellow veterans out. Anything that's a veteran documentary, that's what I'm all about. But I'm not sure about this cannabis because, I just spent 20 years being preached that it was the devil's lettuce. risk my life and limb. I'll lose all my benefits. I'll get kicked out. Not only will I lose my job, I'll probably go to jail. You know, it was that bad. So you talk about your civilian law and everything, then you take it a step further with the military. And so that's always been a fear over our heads. And we've always been preached that it's a Schedule I drug. It's as bad as LSD and or worse, you know, as bad as you know, heroin and other very dangerous drugs. You and I know today that that's bullshit. That's a lie. I didn't know that. But when I started working with these veterans, this was 2017, about 3 years ago, it was like, yeah, you know what? This sounds cool. I like it. Let's do it. I'll talk to the you know, the federal side of the house, get some objective viewpoints on the negative sides of it, and we'll look at your positive side and we'll see where it goes. Long story short, they didn't have the budget to do it. It didn't seem like it was going to work out. But by the time I had gotten done working on all of the plans and doing my research and the education that they taught me, they were working with NFL players and treating TBI. They were working with veterans for PTSD, and they were the ones that turned me on to the organization Normal. And fast forward, here I am, a suicide survivor. I attempted to take my life while I was on active duty mid-career.
Wow.
And which is why I'm a big advocate for mental health, because it was like, as an airman, you never wanted to go and seek out mental health because you would jeopardize your career. Holy cow, they'll kick you out if you're crazy. That's just not true. I had to learn the hard way. I had to learn by waking up in a hospital, and it hit home with me about treating anxiety and depression and suicidal ideations. And I made it a personal mission to air the truth, to find out. Now, mind you, 2017, it's just now starting to get popular. I mean, they've only legalized it in so many states up at this point and things. And so it's a really hot topic. But what's really cool, let's fast forward here. I get to, I call Normal because these guys mention it. Turns out these guys had already been bugging Normal a bunch to, you know, to try to get them to fund it. And they thought I was asking for money. They directed me to the American Legion. And boy, that was a stroke of luck, because the communications director is a retired Marine who is a PA like myself, a public affairs officer. And he was working already with the Congressional Cannabis Caucus on trying to fight for veterans' access to cannabis. And he was already in contact with Boone, Janine, and Josh, and Doc Sisley.
That's
and
awesome.
It was sort of like a dream come true. You just, like, you know, you hear about stumbling onto the right place at the right time. And for me, that was my moment. And he sat down, and long story short, he flipped open a book and he says, "Who do you want to talk to first?"
Wow.
And he showed me all these, you know, these congressmen, gave me all this information. And I just decided I started with Doc Sisley. And sure enough, she was willing to help out and did my first interview for me, helped me build a proof of concept trailer. Mind you, I've never made anything more than short films at this point. This has always been more of a hobby, and just still photography as a profession. But I moved forward, and one thing led to another, and Doc Sisley introduced me to Boone. Boone says, "I really need to talk to Josh." Josh says, "Hey, I'm down here in Florida. Why don't you talk to Mama Lutz?" And then Mama Lutz was like, "I'm on board. We got to talk about my son." And we had the whole story sort of already starting to fall into place. At this point, I had made some efforts at trying to reach others to get a bigger audience and funding, but independents like myself who really have a story and a passion, we aren't necessarily the best businessman in fundraisings. My impatience kind of played into it a little bit, but I just started booking airplane tickets and dates and recruiting volunteers everywhere I could. At this point, I'm working at the Pentagon, and I had just started working there right at the presidential changeover at the last time. And by virtue of being in public affairs and working with the folks that work with Hollywood productions, I just talked to my colleague and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Is this okay?" He said, "Sure." He said, "As long as you're not doing any work on duty time and you're not bad mouthing the DOD, you can go ahead and do whatever you want." And so clear as a bell, you know. at the time
That's
I had the
great.
top secret clearance, so I'm still, it's something, I'm worried about my job, but I'm not worried about it because I've used cannabis before I went in the military, and so I kind of knew that. But to find out all these medical benefits was amazing. So fast forward, I finally got things put in the can, and then we wound up finishing the film and getting a few awards in some different film festivals. And then we got the wind of Congressman Rohrabacher's office and the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, thanks to my colleague, my colleague who was at the American Legion. He's no longer there. He's at Wounded Warrior Project. But yeah, so they invited me to screen my film on Capitol Hill on April 28th in the 450 seat Congressional Auditorium. If you ever
That's
seen this place,
amazing.
it's gorgeous. So I feel like I just leaps and bounds, shot for the moon and reached, and I hit the stars because my whole goal of the film was to impact the American audiences, to influence our legal, our legislators to change the laws to take it off the Schedule I drug.
Yeah.
And here I've got an invitation to some ears who are going to listen to me. And then COVID-19 hit.
Oh man, I was wondering when you mentioned the date, I'm like, wait, that was in the midst of all this stuff. So it didn't end up getting screened there after all?
No, but this is where the personal side of the story goes. So it's kind of like, here I am, I'm on cloud nine, everything's going well. Mind you, I'm fighting for suicide advocacy and anxiety and things like that. Well, it's bad enough that I had what do you call it? Phobia of crowds and things, but now I've brought on agoraphobia and depression and everything else. So the last several months have been pretty down. But then I got picked up for a new streaming service. It was just there was enough steps of faith that that the things just started falling into place. And by May 1st, the film had already been starting to screen, but I didn't realize anything until more like June. And then by then, when I finally got a small check, I was happy that I had a home for my thing. And so I started digging myself out of the hole. And one thing I can talk about that helped me through that was CBD. And it's one of those things that really helped ease my mind.
Well, that's great.
But so today, now I'm working. So the film was doing well in as far as my military audience on social media and things like that. But nobody's ever heard of this new service. And so when I checked back on it, turned out there wasn't a lot of audience viewers looking at it. And so once again, I turned to my veteran community, and I just basically opened up my heart and let people know that that this film is out there, but it's just sitting there. And lo and behold, the word's starting to get out and people are starting to talk about it. And so we're looking into doing some veteran suicide advocacy. So I wound up joining a couple of groups, but the one I started with most recently was excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting winded because I have a lot of emotion involved in this, but the Veterans Action Council, I think we changed the name just recently, but basically cannabis veteran advocates from across the country have been getting together. And this introduced me to a lot of wonderful people who, one person in particular, Eric Stamper here in Maryland, he started his own nonprofit called the Veterans 22 Initiative. And it's a suicide prevention program similar to what I'm doing. And so we're going to be screening the film in Baltimore coming up on November 22nd. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we were going to talk about upcoming things, but
no, that's great.
Yeah, I'm letting things come as they go. So another thing is I also realized recently, because I've been spending a lot of time with family and with the health matters and things like that. My mother reminded me that I also experienced a traumatic brain injury at a young age. And so it's just amazing talking with all the different veterans in these groups that I mentioned, and having all these shared stories and how cannabis, is helping them, and seeing that, it's given me a new mission. So I'm pushing forward on helping them.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
I'm talking
great.
a lot. I'm gonna leave the floor to you for a second to see.
No, I mean that's why this show is out here, is for other folks to come and talk. Nobody wants to hear my voice drone on and on. I was pleased to see that you guys are on Amazon, and I was able to go out and purchase the film there and help a little bit on
Mhm.
that end. So what's the process for getting it on Amazon? Is it difficult? How long did it take and all that? You don't have to
Well,
go real too technical, but I'm just
well,
nosy.
well, a really easy thing with the Amazon. So the first thing is, when getting involved. So I was always trying to get it on one of the big streaming services like Hulu or Netflix, like that. And then during the course of these 3 years, just digital media and cinema and home theater has just completely changed from where it used to be. When I started, Netflix was literally, at the time, was the place where you would put your film after you've gone to a whole bunch of different other screenings, and it would end up there. Now they're the first. They're like the golden arch, the heavenly gates of home theater, and you cannot deal with them directly. You have to go through an agent. And
Really?
yeah, you cannot. They will not negotiate with directly with any. They have to be with an actual distributor who's going to bring them a lot of materials all at once. They don't have the manpower, I guess, to sit and look and screen at the hundreds of thousands of films they do. So it's very interesting, because the place I'm working now, one of my coworkers is actually an independent filmmaker too, and he does historical films on, like on women veterans and things. And he's like, "Hey, I got a friend who somebody hooked me up with this guy. He's a sales agent, and he got mine picked up by a couple of small things and sold some DVDs and things like that." And so I looked the guy up, and the guy was really cool and fair, and he wasn't like one of those pay me forward type of things. He's like, "We'll just do a split shares," and it worked out really well. And that's where that was all happening in the background, leading up till May, when we got picked up by Urban Flix TV. And then from there, they said it's okay for our agreement if we can go ahead and I can still sell my DVDs and rentals and things like that. So, if I wanted to, he could go ahead and upload and do the Amazon, but I'm a tech geek and everything. And if you know the roots of Amazon, it started with self-publishing of books. And so they still have self-publishing of videos as well. So you can actually, if you own the rights to the film and everything like that, they have the same requirements Netflix does. You have to upload. It's very technical and things like that. But because I was doing the full, from cradle to grave of the film production, I already had the technical materials they needed, and I was all doing it on my Mac and everything. And so I just typed in the specific parameters they needed and provided all the materials. And because I was already working with a sales agent, I had to already provide most of that, like the closed captioning and all the technical things go on. And so it was all ready to go. I've been preparing for this for for 3 years.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do they tell you how many views you've had, or how does that? I know with, podcasting, you can look in the background and see how many downloads you've had. I didn't know if they had the same sort of thing with streaming services.
Yeah, well, one of the challenges I'm having, though, is again, because there is a new startup. I don't know how much they have in the resources to provide those kind of things, but I was having to go through my agent who has to do things. So I don't have those real-time updates, which really, it kind of hurts. So what I've had to do recently, it's also another tough decision, is when I'm doing advertising for it, is how do I promote it? Do I send people there, or do I send people to Amazon? And so just recently, I decided to upgrade my website and put them both together on a single landing page with hot links to each one. So yeah, if you go to allegiancefilms.com/watch now, I believe, or watch dash now, it'll come up with that. Or you can just go to allegiancefilm.com. There's no S in that, by the way.
So
And
allegiancefilm.com. Okay. I
yeah,
will make sure to put a link to that on the show notes for today's episode. That way folks can go out and go to the show notes and get right there. So
right. And then from there I can see, and so by doing that, I'm just guessing by averaging that half the people are going to Amazon, the other half are going to the other one, or some measure of that. And I can see the statistics in the Amazon, just like it looks almost like Google Analytics. I can see each day how many minutes somebody's watched the film for, if it was a rental or if it was a purchase. So for those who for those who are interested in keeping me entertained, go ahead and entertain yourself with the film and let me watch the charts go up and down. I appreciate your help.
that's cool. That's cool. Well, it sounds like, I mean, I know it's disappointing that you were set to screen it in front of all these the very people you want to get this film in front of, and then COVID had to squash that. Do you think there's any chance that something like that you could get some sort of screening there again later on, or has that ship sailed already?
Actually, so I've been going through a lot of I'm calling it spiritual awakening. You can thank Fabian a little bit for that. Um, I've been trying to look at things. I've been comparing these virtual conferences I've been having with the veterans and doing private rooms on Facebook with my brothers and sisters in arms, and realizing that I'm not the only one in I hate to say Hollywood because I'm not a Hollywood person, but the actors and everyone else are all out of work too, and the virtual is the way to go. And I was very, very skeptical at the beginning because I'm worried about, here I've invested my entire life savings, and at this point I've literally made like $3,000 out of $25,000
Right,
in a
right.
production, because that was my half of my rating.
Mhm.
And so you don't make documentaries to make money, but you need money to get people to see it, and that's hard. And so that's where I'm loving to be on the outreach, doing my outreach through podcasts. And that's where my spiritual awakening came, and is realizing that I can still reach veterans virtually. In talking with these different veterans groups, one group, the Veterans Cannabis Coalition, is by a veteran by the name of Eric Gopel, and he is a frequent visitor to the Hill. In fact, if you watch C-SPAN, you'll see him up there quite often fighting for veterans' access to cannabis. And he and I were working on I don't know if you know the story about Sean Worsley, but he was a veteran who got jailed for cannabis possession
Oh, is
while
that the guy
driving
in Mississippi?
Alabama.
Alabama. I know it's
Yep,
one of those backwards southern states.
exactly. So we were trying to do
Like
some work.
Texas isn't.
Exactly. So we were trying to work on some activism together to try to help Sean out, and Ebony, his wife. And fast forward, talking about trying to get some word out about the film and things. So with election coming up, it's something that we're going to have to keep pushing forward. We were going to aim for Veterans Day, but it's just going to be too close. But we're
Yeah.
working together to create a summit of sorts, or a conference. It's going to be a virtual meeting where we've already got a verbal okay from Rohrenbach to do a 5-minute speak about the cause, about veterans cannabis.
That's awesome.
And it's all going to be centered around a screening of Unprescribed.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh, Boone, Janine, Fabian, myself, we all got together, and we've already pre-recorded the keynote segment for this. And then on top of that, we're going to have 2 other segments, one on the medical, I believe, and the other segment is going to be on the legal side of it. And we're going to talk about Ebony and the folks that are helping to voice Sean's causes there as well. So all good things come to those who wait. We don't want to rush things. We don't know where our political presence is going to be, and we don't want our political audience not paying attention because they're distracted by the sidelines. So we're going to push it out a little bit further. So you maybe fit something in February perhaps, or sometime after December or February timeframe.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea because everybody is so worried about politics right now.
Exactly.
You can't get them to focus on something else. And who knows how long it'll take before a winner is declared after election day. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And we also have to remember that the fight's not over. Even if we do get it legalized, we still got expungements, look like Sean's case,
Right.
for example, and just so many different things, especially the expungement. I just can't believe that people could be, still in jail for 30 years for less pot than people are making millions off of right now at
Yeah.
dispensaries. So
No, you're
it's a
absolutely
good one.
right on that. What is
Um,
the status of Sean's case? He's in a jail cell right now, isn't he?
yes, but he has been paroled, and
Okay.
they're waiting for further information on that. Um, and and if that's a whole other subject I could probably come on and talk to you about
Yeah.
sometime too, is because the whole reason why he's in there in the first place is because he's from Arizona, and this happened out of state, and then there was a missed court date, and then he had to fly out all the way on a short notice, and so now he's got this felony for not showing up, and now they what the word is, where they bring him back out of state.
Yeah.
And so that's where he is now, and now he's got that on top of it, out of virtually no cause of his own, which is really a sign of where we are in the cannabis laws. Which, again, that's what I talk about in the film. Is the whole reason for prohibition is based on racism and discrimination. It started back in the 30s with the tax stamp to basically discriminate about Mexicans and so forth. And then leading into the 60s, with the hippies and the blacks, that's where they
Yeah.
came up with the schedule, the drug schedule in the first place with the Nixon office. So it
Yeah,
was
and
used to target.
even after, and I can't remember off the top of my head because I have a 2-second memory, that
Mhm.
Nixon had commissioned that guy, the Schaefer Commission. He had commissioned Schaefer to go out and study cannabis, and Schaefer came back and said, "Look, this doesn't need to be on the schedule. This doesn't need to be
Yeah,
certainly doesn't need to be Schedule 1."
it
And
happened with Heron, Herrenhausen. What's his? No, not what's it? The drug czar from the 30s, Anslinger.
Anslinger,
Anslinger did the
Harry
same thing. He had
Anslinger,
like
yeah.
what, 13 or something tests, and only one of them came back negative, and he said, "We'll go with that one."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It's some pretty shady stuff that got this plant made illegal in the first place. But I guess that's water under the bridge, and now we've got 90 years worth of propaganda to overcome.
Absolutely. So I regained my train of thought here. So with the things that we still have to do, though, is we still need to study the efficacy of it, like Dr. Sisley's doing. And but we seriously have to look at the mental health of our veterans and get this into the hands of the VA, like they're doing in Canada.
Yeah.
So you had Fabian on the show, right? And so Fabian and I were talking about so when I went up to Canada to film the segment with Fabian, and I was actually going to film a potential follow-up called Prescribed, where we would focus the first film on the veterans, the whole need for it. And then the new one would be looking at places like Canada and Jerusalem, and why it's working there, and why aren't we doing it? In fact, when Fabian got wind of it, it was basically through my early social media acts. His girlfriend, Jules, she saw it, and she decided to put me in touch with him, and found out that we're basically on the same mission, to heal veterans from trauma.
Yeah.
And if you know his story, it's a long one, it's a good one, but it is his trauma. He also does the Veterans for Healing group. And when I went up there, it was during Remembrance Day, which is our Veterans Day. And we did a whole ceremony with pinning the poppies in the trees and remembering their fallen comrades in Afghanistan. A lot of them were engineers in the Canadian Army. And it was extremely touching. And if you watch the preview, the teaser the proof of concept we came up for Prescribed, you can see what a bond there is with these veterans, with these soldiers. And so when I was up there, Fabian talked to me about, he wants this to be a global thing one day. He'd love to see it brought down to the South,
Yeah.
down to here in the States. And another year he brought me back up again, but this time he brought me with Josh and a gentleman by the name of Frank, who's literally my poster child. He's the guy that's on the cover with the tattoos, with his head and
Okay.
cane.
Yeah.
Because Frank is a close friend of mine who helped me
Hmm.
put this together in the early days. And it's a spiritual time to get together with your peers who have similar cases, and it all might be different. One person might have an injury, an amputee perhaps, and then somebody else. I've been hearing a lot of veterans are suffering from survivor's guilt. And my own personal trauma, like I said, I had my suicide attempt mid career, and it wasn't even on a deployment, or I didn't even go to combat. It was something between my domestic life and my career life, and you don't take one home to the other and vice versa. And I had nowhere to go. And he told me trauma's trauma. It's all the same.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a great book, and you may have, somebody in your film may have talked about it, called "The Body Keeps the Score" by oh, I can't remember the guy's. It's like a German last name, something Vanderkirk or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's a really good book that talks about trauma and how even if there's trauma that we don't have it may have been something that happened to us before we even remember, like have a physical remembrance of it, but our body remembers that trauma. It's a great book, and I've recommended it to other veterans that I've spoken to, because it talks about how trauma and how it affects our body, and even though we've forgotten about it, it's still there latent in our body, and how being aware of that can help us bring healing to our body too.
Um, well, if I may, I was thinking it wouldn't do me justice to talk about the people that are in the film. Um, so Fabian, you had on the show, he
Hmm.
was brought in really to give that that hint that, hey guys, why aren't we doing this? So I
Yeah.
can kind of lead into the story. But it was a great story, and I wish I could have told more of it in his. But the beginning opens with a monologue by Boone Cutler. And I hope I can get Boone on your show as well, because he
I'd
is
love to
very
have him
well
on.
spoken. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's excellent. He's a good radio person. But then it leads into a gentleman named Josh Frey, and a
Hmm.
lot of the story follows Josh. And Josh is um, he's still experiencing, from the trauma, because he's had shoulder, his shoulder was basically disintegrated from a gunshot wound, and
Yeah.
electrodes put in his back to help him heal some other injuries. And he basically, it's like if Murphy's Law could happen, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, and it did, where he wound up getting nearly blown up by an IED, just filled with shrapnel from the explosion nearby, and then a week later getting into a gunfight and then getting his shoulder blown off. And
Mm.
between the footage I got from the Department of Defense, from the public access, to um, some of Josh's own personal footage, on top of him putting me in touch with the cameraman who was embedded with his unit, made some very personal storytelling. And honestly, a lot of the film effort went into that. And I
Yeah.
wish,
I
wish
thought
I
it
could
was
have told you.
unbelievable that y'all were able to
Yeah,
get that footage of when
absolutely.
yeah, it was I was shocked that y'all were able to get that. Honestly, I'm like, I just never would have thought that y'all would have been able to have that kind of footage to actually, so people could actually
Exactly.
kind of be there when it happened.
And then Josh is so animated, and he
Yeah.
doesn't like to talk to the press and things. He's great with
Hmm.
around vets, and he's extremely vocal and outgoing and things like that. And by virtue, he had done some interviews and then he shied away from them, but Boone really encouraged him to be a part. And I thank Boone for doing that. Again, like I said, because he introduced me to Janine Lutz, or Mama Lutz.
Hmm.
And you'll see in the film that Josh he gave me such a colorful, very robust, detailed story. I
Yeah.
could actually, the whole piece literally had to be edited just for time, because there were so many details, and it was amazing. And that might even be a special feature I may do.
Yeah.
But that led me to Janine Lutz, whose son, Johnny, his story was a little different, and he had just hurt his back, but he had some PTSD because they had
Hmm.
fallen into some very precarious situations where they had no supplies or anything.
Yeah.
And his story was, he didn't use cannabis. His mom was believing that had cannabis been legal, him and many other veterans that aren't with us anymore probably still could be. And I think, like I mentioned, in Israel and in Canada, it's working for their veterans. And why are we hiding our heads in the sand about this sort of thing? Her son took his life because he was twice prescribed a drug that they knew was affecting him mentally. And as I traveled around doing all these interviews, I've got many more stories that I just didn't have enough room to film or to include in that. Every one of them was the same. Every one of them was on a handful of pills, a combination. And you understand they're giving it to them for things like sleep deprivation, but they're also given anxiety pills that affect their heart rates and other things. And then then they have back pains or some other kind of injury, and so they're given, high opioids. And we know the story behind the opioid scandals and the crisis here. And that's why it was great to get Dr. Sisley on here to get her study. And so for me, this is a way of supporting that, which is she's still fighting that with our federal government. But here I am. I'm getting pretty winded about it. But it's great to talk because I've with the COVID and things like this. This film is really a personal thing where we would do it with a screening with an audience. The group of us, any one of us that could attend, would come out, and after showing the film, we would talk. I even had Josh's wife on once, or talked to some people in an audience with us once. And
yeah, I'm sure she's got a unique perspective on this.
Certainly. So we talked about Fabian's idea to bring it down to the States and make it worldly. I thought, well, that's great. Maybe, somebody who has the resources could do it, but I don't have anything like that. But then I realized with the virtual world that we're in now.
Yeah.
Well, I've been working with virtual groups right now. Why can't we use this to join those different groups together? And so Fabian and I are in the talks of bringing Veterans for Healing to the United States and I'll be heading the chapter for that. And hopefully, that could spread to where eventually we can get different state chapters and do different things where we can tie into the GAF and the fund to help, rehabilitate these veterans, using the 4 pillars of healing that Fabian mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, that's great news because we do have we've gotten a growing number of states that at least where a lot of veterans will have access to medical cannabis. So, I mean, certainly worth bringing it down and getting more veterans. And the more we can get involved in this type program, the more lives we can save as a result.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do with the film is get the word out that this is what veterans are going through. We're only 1% of the population, but it's also, you have to understand, suicide and trauma are not, and PTSD on top of that, are not limited to service members. And if people could see this and realize that if we can use this to wake up the government, and this could speak for the rest of the country as well. So
yeah. Well, it's not like when those men and women come home with PTSD that it only affects them. It affects their immediate family, their extended family, their friends. So it doesn't just affect them, it affects a whole community. And
Absolutely.
So when we bring healing to them, we bring healing to those communities. So we're affecting much more than 1 to 2% of the population.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed the film. I highly recommend that anybody that's listening go out and go to allegiancefilm.com and click wherever you want to watch it, and highly recommend that you download and watch the film. Now you've mentioned that you're doing some virtual events. Do you have any of those coming up in the near future, and where can folks find out about those virtual streaming events?
Veterans Initiative 22 is going to be doing a Veterans Appreciation Day on November 22nd in Baltimore. And I will give you a link. It's going to be in Ellicott City. It's going to be all day. It's going to be free to veterans. And we're going to have, I believe we might have a small viewing if there's enough space for social distancing. But then we're also going to make an opportunity where people can go on Eventbrite and they can pre-register. If they're a veteran, they can get it for free, and they'll receive a link on where they can watch the film.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, considering how many people that have military backgrounds have difficulty in large crowds, maybe this virtual event is a better venue for them all the way around.
I agree. Yeah, especially with that social phobia that a lot of us have, and now a lot of us having agoraphobia. I think it's a good thing where they can still connect, and that's what my mission is going to be. My mission's always been about preventing suicide of all kinds, veteran suicide, especially because we have sort of a unique difference from the other 99% of the rest of the civilian population, and creating that awareness is my goal. I don't think we can stop suicide, but we can definitely lower the numbers. 22 veterans a day is staggering. And, they argue, oh, well, that number is too high. It's more like 17. I don't care, but one is too many a day.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's what the purpose of the film is to talk about. I think we're finally have some awareness about opioid, the abuse of the pharmaceutical companies and things, but we still have to hold them accountable, and we still have to come up with alternatives. I think cannabis is that alternative. And to prevent our veterans, people like myself who work in the federal government, a lot of us, like when I worked at the Pentagon, I had a top secret clearance. And so I obviously couldn't use it because I get piss tests regularly. And so there's that fear of losing your job. Well, listen, I told you I have anxiety. I want to be able to be treated even though I'm in a state that's legal in Maryland. But if you work in a federal job, like thousands of others in the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, thousands of us are veterans, and we work for the federal government. And the number of us that are suffering from anxiety and other issues like that can be helped, because let's face it, alcohol is the only thing that we've been conditioned for. And I've had personal negative experiences with that I don't drink anymore because of that. But, my insomnia still isn't being treated, and I can't do the heavy pills they do. And so I suffer. So
Well, even if we get it legalized or at least taken down from a Schedule 1, it's going to be overcoming that stigma and the negative feelings that people have about it. And even, some private employers in states that are legal, they still discriminate against people who use cannabis just because of all the negative propaganda that's been put out about it. So we've got an uphill battle, but I'm very pleased to see the work that you're doing, the work that Fabian is doing, and that y'all are going to bring some of that to the United States, because it's not cannabis isn't an end all be all. It is one piece of a puzzle. And, Fabian, it seems like they're doing great work up there with veterans and getting the whole body, not just using cannabis, but just getting the whole thing in there.
Absolutely. And that'll be our mission is to bring this here, to do the outings that they do, to do the 4 pillars of healing, but also to add on the extra, to fight for veteran access to cannabis in states that are still inaccessible. So we want to make this a national and a whole North America thing, and then eventually make it a global thing, a whole NATO-wide type of event.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to partnering with Fabian on that. So more to follow. Him and I are going to have a discussion this week, and we'll hear some more news on that.
That's great. I'm excited about that. That's very promising. Steve, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this film. Like I said, I watched it and I loved it. I highly recommend it to everybody to go out and check it out. And it gives you, it takes you on a roller coaster of emotions for sure. So it's a great film. You did a great job. And I am glad that I didn't have to be the one to pick and choose what actually went into the film, because I'm sure there's a lot that you weren't able to get in there because of time constraints, but you did a great job.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Go check out the show notes. I'll put links to the event that's coming up, and then to your website on the show notes for today's episode. And that way folks can go learn more about you and learn more about the work that any events you've got coming up, and the work that you've got going on in the future.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
All right, bye-bye.
Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishealsme.com/126. Please go out and either watch or share, or both, watch and share the film Unprescribed. I think it is an excellent film that talks about the healing powers of cannabis for our veterans. And if you know of any veterans who are struggling with PTSD, put this bug in their ear. Tell them about this film, and maybe they can get plugged into a community and be able to use cannabis as part of a treatment plan for their PTSD and any physical ailments that they might have. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. We will be back here on Monday with another healing story. Until then, you guys have a great week. Thank you so much for listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode of the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app you're using. Do you have a suggestion for a guest on Cannabis Heals Me? Send an email to podcast@cannabishealsme.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not take any information from Cannabis Heals Me or its guests as medical advice. Contact your licensed physician before taking cannabis or using it for medical treatments.